Welcome back. In this video, we are going to take a look at both Pattern 2 and Pattern 3. Pattern 2 echoes Pattern 1, but we leave out the verb in the second clause because, and only if, it would needlessly repeat the verb of the first clause. Notice also you may have a direct object or subject complement. The comma says to the reader, mentally insert the same verb you have already read in the first clause. You need parallel wording in both clauses, and the verb must be exactly the same. For example, this is not parallel. The reader can't use the verb from the first clause and put it where the comma is because George like punk rock is ungrammatical. The correct form is George likes punk rock. Sometimes the verb is exactly like the one in the first clause, but you may still have an awkward sounding sentence if you omit too many words or if you forget the importance of rhythm and sound. To see how this works, pause the video and read this aloud. This sentence sounds as if Bill played something written by 3 people. Now pause the video and read this aloud. When you leave out more than the verb, you may need to put in a word such as one here. This sentence and the last sentence leave out more than just the verb. You might even leave out the subject and the verb. This pattern may look easy, but it is actually very sophisticated. Still, when you don't want to repeat the same verb in the second or third clause, this pattern could be helpful. You'll have to develop your ear to test whether it's the right time for Pattern 2. Does the sentence sound natural and have a rhythmic balance? If it is awkward or unclear, it is not the right time to use this pattern. Here are some examples. The mother and son each had a goal, hers educational, his recreational. For many of us, the new math teacher was a savior, for others, a pain. His mother told him to rent a car, his sister to pack the suitcases. Now let's take a look at some professional examples. Look at this one from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thought is the blossom, language the bud, action the fruit. Here's another one from the Wall Street Journal. Lou Williams was in for adultery, John Jones for gambling. Here are some checkpoints to keep in mind when looking at using Pattern 2. First, be sure that each sentence really has 2 independent clauses in it, even though the second one has an unexpressed verb or other words. Secondly, be sure that the verb omitted in the second clause matches exactly in form and tense the verb in the first clause. Third, after the semicolon, if more than the verb is left out, be sure the structure is still parallel and the thought complete. Finally, use a semicolon if there is no conjunction. If there is a conjunction, one of the fanboys mentioned in Pattern 1, then use a comma. A semicolon never goes with a coordinating conjunction. Now let's take a look at Pattern 3. This pattern is exactly like Patterns 1 and 2 in structure. Although it is a compound, it is very different in content, as the colon implies. Pattern 3 is a compound sentence with an explanatory statement, which are clauses separated by a colon. You have a general statement or idea, which is an independent clause, then a colon followed by a specific statement or example, which is an independent clause. The colon performs a special function. It signals the reader that something important or explanatory will follow. In this particular pattern, the colon signals that the second clause will specifically explain or expand some idea expressed only vaguely in the first clause. The first statement will contain a word or an idea that needs explaining. The second statement will give some specific information or example about that idea. Use it when you want the second part of a sentence to explain the first part, give an example, or provide an answer to an implied question. In the examples that follow, notice that the first independent statement mentions something in a general way, a harsh truth, a single horrifying meaning. Then the independent statement after the colon answers the questions. What harsh truth? Which horrifying meaning? Basically, the second clause makes the first one clear. Now let's look at some examples. First, Darwin's The Origin of Species forcibly states a harsh truth. Only the fittest survive. Next, the empty coffin in the center of the crypt had a single horrifying meaning. Dracula had left his tomb to stalk the village streets in search of fresh blood. Remember Yogi Berra's advice, it ain't over till it's over. A lizard never worries about losing its tail. It can always grow another. All agreed she was well qualified. She graduated from Harvard with a 4.0 grade point average. Superman has extraordinary powers. He flies like a bird and has X-ray vision. Now let's take a look at a professional example from Reginald Hill. The murmuring water, the morning fresh garden unheated yet by the lemon sun, the flight of a white-browed blackbird, all helped to make unreal the tableau of the man kneeling by the sundial. Here's an example from Claudia Glenn Downing. Old cars and young children have several things in common. Both are a responsibility and have to be fed often or they break down. The sentence uses a capital letter after the colon and a final clause beginning with the coordinator or. The final clause is so short that the author chose to omit the comma before the coordinator. Now that you have learned all three of the compound constructions, notice the differences among them. Patterns 1, 2, and 3 are not simply three different ways to punctuate the same sentence. The words must perform different functions. The sentences must do different things. Pattern 1 must make two closely related statements about the same idea, statements you do not want to punctuate as two separate sentences. Pattern 2 must have a specific word or words from the first clause implied but not stated in the second. Otherwise, no ellipsis is possible. Pattern 3 must have a second independent clause that in some way amplifies or explains the idea stated in the first independent clause. Do not use pattern 3 with a colon unless the second statement is related to the first. Remember the test for every compound sentence. Both clauses must be full statements and capable of standing alone as sentences. Thank you for watching, and now you should be equipped to use both colons and semicolons in your sentences and in your writing. Stay tuned for patterns 4 through 8.